You're grounded until you apologize. My brother actually said that to me. Arms crossed, voice raised so the whole family could hear it over Sunday dinner. Like I was 12 instead of 34. Then my father set down his coffee and added 4 quiet words. Know your place. Everyone waited for me to cry or push back or beg my way out of it. Instead, I just picked up my fork, said, fine, and finished my meal like nothing had happened. 2 weeks later, he planned to hand our family diner to my brother in front of 50 people. But the next morning, when my father walked into the shop, he was so sure he owned. What he found wasn't me. It was a letter. And not one of them had ever realized that every signature that actually mattered already had my name on it. Before I go any further, if your jaw just tightened reading that, do me a favor and hit like and subscribe. It's the only way stories like mine reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I read everyone. I'm Amy. This is the story of the family business everyone swore belonged to my father, and the night they learned whose name was really on it. Let's go back to the beginning. The diner opens at 6. I get there at 5. I have for 11 years. I unlock the back door, and here's a small thing nobody ever noticed. Mine is the only key that works the back lock. My father's key sticks. He's never had it fixed because he's never there at 5 in the morning to need it. So every day, before the sun, I'm the one who lets the day in. Bobbitt's Diner sits on a corner in a suburb east of Cleveland. Brick front. A neon sign that buzzes when it rains. 18 tables, a counter with 9 stools, and a back booth my brother started calling his office 3 years ago, though I've never once seen him work in it. By 6, the coffee is on. The grill is hot. Silas is at the line. He's our head cook, 20 years here, hands like oven mitts. By 7, the regulars come. Walt, who orders the same eggs every morning. The nurses coming off the night shift. The contractors before a job. My father arrives at 9. He comes in like the sun deciding to show up. Morning, morning, he says, working the room. He shakes hands. He tells the founding story to anyone who'll listen. How he built this place from nothing in 1988. How a man's name on a door means something. The regulars love him. He's warm and funny, and he remembers everyone's grandkids. He passes the counter where I'm running the morning numbers and he pats my shoulder. There's my girl, keeping the lights on. He says it like a joke. Everybody laughs. I laugh too because that's what you do. He doesn't know how true it is. Or he does, and he's decided it doesn't count. Around noon, my brother arrives. Holden is 29. He parks in the spot closest to the door, the one we save for deliveries, and he walks straight to his booth without touching an apron. He orders lunch. He tells the staff how he'd run things differently. He calls the diner my future with a mouthful of food I rang up, cooked by a man whose paycheck I signed. He has never opened. He has never closed. He cannot work the register. I know this because the one time he tried, he comped $40 by accident and blamed the machine. My mother, Nora, comes in some afternoons. She wipes down tables nobody asked her to wipe. She's quiet in a way that took me years to understand. Not peaceful, just careful. She married my father at 20 and learned early that the safest thing in our house was agreement. That afternoon, she stopped beside me at the counter. She didn't look up from the rag in her hands. Your father has news, she said. Sunday, at dinner. What kind of news? She folded the rag, folded it again. The good kind, he says. Then she walked away before I could ask what that meant. I went back to the numbers. That's the thing about running a place. There's always a number waiting. A vendor invoice short by 2 cases. A server's hours that didn't add up. The cooler bill, which had crept up again. I worked through them the way I always do, and around me the diner did its noon thing. Plates clattering, Silas calling an order, the bell over the door ringing every few minutes. I installed that bell, by the way. 4 years ago, after a delivery driver wandered into the kitchen because nobody heard him come in. I ordered it, I mounted it, I adjusted the bracket twice so it rang clean. My father tells people it came with the place. It didn't. Almost nothing here came with the place. The espresso machine, the new menus, the point-of-sale system that finally stopped eating tickets. Those came with me. I'm telling you this not to brag. I'm telling you because it's the texture of being invisible. It isn't one big erasure. It's 1,000 small ones. A bell you hung that came with the place. A system you fought to install that we always had. A founding story that has room for everyone except the person who keeps the doors open. I stood there with the lunch receipts in my hand and felt something cold move through me. I didn't know what it was yet. I just knew my mother couldn't look at me when she said it. And my mother has spent 40 years learning exactly when not to look at someone. To understand why that scared me, you have to understand how I got here. I grew up in this diner, not the way Holden did, sitting in a booth, drinking free milkshakes. I grew up working it. I was 9 the first time I rolled silverware into napkins. 11 when I learned to bus a table without dropping a glass. 13 when my father taught me to count a register. Because, he said, you've got the patience for it. He never taught Holden. Holden got a bike, then a car, then excuses. I remember being 12 and watching my brother, who was 7, sit in a booth doing nothing while I refilled ketchup bottles. I asked my father if Holden could help. My father laughed. He's a boy. He'll have his own things. I didn't know what that meant. I learned. The boys' things were everything that came easy. The girls' things were everything that needed doing. When I was 16, I asked my father why I worked weekends, and my brother didn't. He didn't even pause. Boys carry the name, he said. Girls carry the trays. He smiled when he said it. He thought it was wisdom. I carried the trays. I carried them through high school, through the community college classes I took at night in accounting that nobody asked about. I'd come home at 10, smelling like fryer oil, and study at the kitchen table until midnight. My mother would leave a plate out for me, covered in foil. She never said good job, but the plate was always there. I've thought about that a lot since. The plate was the most she could risk. I was good with numbers. Numbers don't decide they like your brother better. A column either balances or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you find the dollar that's hiding. And you feel something steady when you do. School was the one place my last name didn't come with a ceiling. I graduated at the top of the accounting program. Nobody from my family came. There was a shift to cover, and the person covering it was me. By 22, I was at the diner full-time. Not because I couldn't leave, because every time I tried, something broke that only I knew how to fix. A vendor dispute. A payroll mistake. A health inspection my father had forgotten was coming. I'd patch it, quietly, and he'd take the credit, warmly, and the years went by. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that for 12 years. Then came 2019. The year the shop almost died. I remember the envelope. State letter. Red stamp across the front. I opened it at the counter because my father had stopped opening the mail he didn't like. He'd let it pile in a drawer he called his later drawer, as if later were a place. Unpaid sales tax. Penalties. A notice that our license to operate was under review. The number at the bottom was $80,000. It hadn't happened overnight. I went through the later drawer that night, all of it, and pieced together 2 years of missed filings and ignored notices. My father had been collecting the sales tax from every customer and not sending it on, not out of malice, out of avoidance. The same avoidance that left a bell unhung and a cooler bill creeping. He'd been quietly drowning the business one unopened envelope at a time, while telling regulars he built it from nothing. I found my father in his office, the back booth, before Holden claimed it, and I put the letter in front of him. He read it. His face went gray. And then he did the thing he always did when the ground moved. He looked at me. "Fix it," he said. "Not let's figure this out. Not what do we do. Fix it." Like I was the machine that handled the parts of his life he didn't want to touch. So I did. I called a lawyer, Cordelia Hughes, a small business attorney a vendor had recommended. She was calm in a way that made the panic in my chest go quiet. We met at a coffee shop 2 towns over because I didn't want my father wandering in. She looked at the books I'd photographed, the debt, the structure of the place, which was barely a structure at all. The diner was a sole proprietorship held together with my father's pride and my unpaid hours. "Here's the truth," she said. "Right now, this business is your father personally. His name, his liability, his risk. If it goes under, it takes him with it. And from these books, the only reason it hasn't gone under is you." She tapped the photo of the payroll. "Whose handwriting is this?" "Mine." "All of it?" "All of it." She nodded slowly. "If you want to save it, you restructure. Form an LLC. Bring the debt under it. Negotiate a payment plan with the state, which I can help you do. And whoever puts in the capital to clear that balance gets the membership interest to match. That's not me being clever. That's just how it works. Money in equals ownership. I had savings. I had clean credit because I'd never had time to spend money. I'd been working 70-hour weeks for years and had nothing to show for it except a number in an account I'd been too tired to spend. I emptied the savings and I borrowed the rest against my own name, and over 4 months Cordelia and I cleared the $80,000 and negotiated the penalties down, and we formed Bobbitt's Diner LLC, 60% to me, 40% to my father. I was named the managing member. There was a clause Cordelia insisted on, that the sale of all or substantially all of the company's assets required my written consent. "You're carrying the risk," she said. "You hold the controls. If you do nothing else, I tell you, do this." She underlined it twice on the copy she gave me. I still have that copy. The double underline is still there. My father signed it on the hood of his car in the parking lot. It was raining a little. He didn't read it. He never reads anything that looks like homework. "Just fix it," he said again, the same 2 words, and he handed the pen back, and he went inside to tell a regular about the time he started this place with nothing. He never asked what he signed. Not that day. Not in the 6 years after. The most important document of his life, signed in the rain on a car hood, because reading it would have meant admitting his daughter was holding the rope. For 6 years, I ran a business my family thought was a hobby I'd taken up. I want to be precise about what ran means, because the word does too little work. I did payroll every 2 weeks. Silas, the servers, the dishwashers, the kid who came in summers. I negotiated with the vendors, the linen service, the man who fixed the walk-in cooler at 2 a.m. the night before Thanksgiving. I filed the quarterly taxes with Iris Calloway, our accountant, and I signed every return. I passed the health inspections. I renewed the license that had once almost killed us. I read the contracts. I held the keys. I learned things you only learn by doing them. That a freezer fails on the worst possible weekend, always. That a good server is worth 3 mediocre ones and you fight to keep her. That the linen company will raise the rate every spring and back down every spring if you call. That a health inspector respects a clean walk-in more than a clever excuse. I learned the rhythm of a small business the way you learn a person you live with, by being there at 5 a.m. and 11 p.m., and every hour that the people who get the credit are asleep. And the whole time, the story of the diner got bigger and I got smaller inside it. My father's founding tale grew with the telling. Some years he built the place alone. Some years he'd had help, sure, family pitches in. That was me. I was family pitches in. I'd hear him say it to a table of regulars while I was 3 feet away balancing the month, and I'd feel myself thin out. like a name written over so many times the paper wears through. Once, a regular asked me, sweetly, meaning nothing by it, "So, do you help your dad out here?" Help my dad. I'd just spent the morning saving a shipment, covering a no-show, and catching a $400 error before it hit the books. Something like that, I said, and refilled her coffee. That's the answer invisibility teaches you. Something like that. You stop correcting people. Correcting people costs more than it's worth. And you're tired. And the column still needs to balance. I told myself it didn't matter. The work mattered. The people mattered. Walt and his eggs. The nurses coming off nights, who knew I'd have a pot of decaf going because they couldn't sleep on the regular stuff. Silas, who'd been there longer than my marriage would have lasted if I'd ever had time to have one. Silas noticed. He's the only one who did. One closing, maybe 2 years ago, he leaned on the counter while I counted the drawer. "You know," he said, "I've worked for 3 owners in my life. 2 of them signed my checks." He let that sit. Only one of them ever asked if my kid's surgery went okay. I didn't look up. "Your father?" "You," he said. Then he got his coat and went home, and left me standing there with my throat tight over a cash drawer. I think that was the closest anyone came in all those years to saying the true thing out loud. You. Not the man whose name was on the door. The woman counting the drawer at 11 at night. He said it once and never made a thing of it, which is its own kind of respect. And I held on to it longer than I'd admit. I want to ask you something, and I mean it. Be honest with me. Have you ever been the one holding a family together while everyone else took the credit? The one who fixes it, quietly, and watches someone else get thanked? Tell me below. I think more of you know this feeling than anyone admits, and I'd like to see you in the comments tonight. Because that was my life. Steady. Invisible. Mine in every way except the one that gets said out loud. And then came that Sunday dinner, the one my mother couldn't warn me about. We were at my parents' house. Pot roast, the good plates. My father waited until the food was served. Then he tapped his glass with his fork, the way he does when he wants the room. "I've made a decision," he said. He was grinning. "It's time to think about the future. So I've decided. Holden's going to take over the shop." Holden leaned back like he'd won something. My mother looked at her plate, and I sat very still, holding a fork over food I no longer wanted, and thought, take over what exactly? I didn't say anything at dinner. That's a thing about me people misread as weakness. I go quiet when something matters. My mind gets very clear and very cold, and the words slow down, because the wrong word spent too early is a word you don't get back. So I said, "Congratulations, Holden," in a voice that sounded almost real, and I helped clear the plates, and I drove home. And in my kitchen with the lights off, I let myself feel exactly how strange it was. Take over the shop, as if the shop were a thing my father could hand to anyone, as if there were no LLC, no operating agreement, no 60%, no clause requiring my consent. As if 6 years of my signature had simply evaporated because a man tapped a glass with a fork. Maybe my father had forgotten what he signed. He forgets paperwork the way other people forget dreams. But forgetting doesn't unmake a document. The state of Ohio doesn't care what story you tell at dinner. The next week, Holden started acting like an heir. He told a vendor he'd be making changes soon. He measured the back booth for a bigger table. He said, "About time," to my face, in the kitchen, while Silas pretended not to hear. He brought a friend in one afternoon and gave him a tour like a real estate agent. "Knock out this wall," he said, gesturing at the wall that holds the kitchen up. "Open concept. The counter's gotta go." Walt was sitting at that counter. Walt put down his coffee very slowly. Holden didn't notice. Holden has never once in his life noticed the person his words landed on. I watched all of it and I said nothing because saying something was a word spent too early. But I started keeping a small list. Not of evidence yet, just of behavior. The vendor he'd lied to. The wall he wanted gone. The day the consultants came. I've kept lists my whole life. It's how I think. A column either balances or it doesn't. And then, one night, I saw the thing that turned my unease into something sharper. I'd stayed late doing the schedule. Holden had come by to check on his investment, his words, and he'd left his phone on the counter while he used the restroom. It lit up. I wasn't snooping. The preview just sat there, face up, the way the truth sometimes does. A text. From a contact saved as Marlowe. It said, "Need your final number by Friday. Cash deal moves fast or it doesn't move." I read it twice. Then the screen went dark. Marlowe. I knew that name. Garrett Marlowe ran a hospitality group that had spent the last few years buying up little restaurants around the county, gutting them, and turning them into the same gray bistro 4 times over. I'd watched him do it to the Greek place on Lee Road and the old pancake house by the highway. Same beige paint. Same overpriced small plates. Same shuttered look 6 months later when the neighborhood stopped coming. He wasn't a partner. He was a buyer. And not even a good one. The kind who pays little and leaves nothing. Final number. Cash deal. My brother was negotiating a price for something that wasn't his. I put the phone back exactly where it had been, face up, the way I found it. When Holden came back from the restroom, he picked it up, glanced at it, and pocketed it without a flicker. He had no idea. He looked at me doing the schedule and he said, "Don't bother learning the new system too well. Things are going to change around here." And he smiled, and he left. I finished the schedule. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I'd expected them to shake. I drove home and sat in the dark kitchen again, and this time the cold in me had a shape. They weren't just going to hand Holden the shop as a gesture. There was a number. There was a deadline. There was a man with cash who gutted places like mine. They were going to sell it. My diner. The one I'd saved, the one I ran, the one whose every legal control sat in my name. And they were going to sell it out from under me, and they hadn't even thought to ask, because in their story, I was still the girl who carried the trays. Why was my brother negotiating a price for a thing he didn't own? There was only one way to find out. I had to stop wondering and start reading. The next morning, I came in at 5 like always. But before the coffee, before the grill, I went to the small fireproof box in the office where I keep the things that matter, and I pulled the LLC file. I read it the way you read a map when you're lost, slowly with my finger on the lines. There it was, in language my father had never bothered to learn. Bobbitt's Diner, LLC, member, Amy Bobbitt, 60%, managing member. Member, Reginald Bobbitt, 40%. And the clause Cordelia had insisted on, the one signed on the hood of a car by a man who didn't read it. The sale of all or substantially all of the assets of the company shall require the written consent of the managing member. That's me. The written consent is mine. Without it, there is no sale. Not to Marlowe. Not to anyone. I sat with that for a long minute. Then I started gathering. I called Iris Calloway, our accountant. I asked her to pull 6 years of returns. She didn't ask why. Iris is a paper purist. She lives for the moment someone finally wants the records. By that afternoon, I had them, and every single one was signed by me. Not my father. Me. The person the state of Ohio recognized as the one responsible for this business was the same person my brother had told to apologize. Then I talked to Silas. I waited until the lunch rush died and we were alone at the line. "Silas," I said, "has anyone been in here measuring? Looking at the kitchen?" He wiped his hands on his apron. Slow. "2 guys. Tuesday. Said they were with Marlowe Hospitality." He looked at me. Holden let him in. Told me they were consultants. They photographed the walk-in. Measured the hood. He paused. "I didn't like it. Figured you knew." I didn't, I said. Thank you. So the buyer's people had already been inside, measuring my kitchen for the renovation that comes after a sale. The deal wasn't a someday. It was a Friday deadline, cash in hand, almost done thing. I needed to see it on paper. And here's the part that still amazes me. I didn't have to break into anything. Because Holden, who couldn't run a register, also couldn't keep a secret. He'd been using the diner's own email, the account I set up, the account I had the password to, because I'm the one who set up everything, to send Marlowe documents from a printer in the back office. I want to be clear that I didn't have to do anything sneaky to find it. It was the company account, on the company computer, that I administer. He'd been so sure I was furniture that he'd used the furniture to commit it all to writing. I opened the sent folder, and there it was, a draft purchase and sale agreement. Buyer, Marlowe Hospitality. Seller, listed as Reginald Bobbitt, owner. Signed, scanned, my father's looping signature, on the seller line. Holden listed as representative. The price was a lowball cash number that made my stomach turn. Less than half what the business was worth, because Marlowe doesn't pay for what he plans to gut. But there was more, and the more was worse. There was a thread, weeks of it. Holden and Marlowe's people, going back and forth. In one message, Holden wrote, "Don't worry about my sister. She does the bookkeeping. She's not an owner. She just thinks she runs the place." In another, when Marlowe's side asked for documentation of clear title, Holden had sent a photo of the old, pre-2019 paperwork. The sole proprietorship, the version where the diner was just my father, the version that hadn't been true in 6 years. He either didn't know about the LLC or was betting nobody would check. He'd built the entire sale on a document that the law had replaced in 2019. He'd sold a buyer a version of the diner that no longer existed. My father had signed away a business he only 40% owned. My brother had brokered it on the strength of a structure that had been dissolved. And the one signature the law actually required, the managing member's written consent, was nowhere, because they didn't know it existed. I printed it. I printed all of it. The agreement, the thread, the photo of the outdated paperwork, the message where my brother called me a bookkeeper who only thinks she runs the place. I made a folder, the way I make folders, labeled and ordered, tabbed and dated. I drove to Iris Calloway's office the next morning and had her certify copies of the 6 years of returns. I asked Cordelia what else mattered, and she told me. And I gathered that too. The filed articles of organization from the Secretary of State, the bank records showing me as sole signatory, the loan against my name that cleared the $80,000. By the end of the week, I had a folder so complete that Cordelia, when she finally saw it, set down her coffee and said, "You should have been a litigator." It was the first time I'd heard her sound impressed. It was, I realized, one of the only times in my adult life anyone had looked at my work and named it for what it was. I sat in the office at the end of the night with 6 years of returns, the operating agreement, and a signed sale neither of them had the right to make. I found it. And the strangest, quietest feeling came over me. Not triumph. Something steadier. They had built their whole plan on the belief that I was no one. And I held, in a labeled folder, the proof that I was the only one who could stop it. I found it. And the strangest, quietest feeling came over me. Not triumph. Something steadier. They had built their whole plan on the belief that I was no one. And I held, in a labeled folder, the proof that I was the only one who could stop it. I closed the diner that night and didn't go home right away. I sat in the empty dining room with one light on. It's a different place when it's empty. You can hear the cooler hum, the neon sign buzzing out front. The booths sit there like they're remembering the day. I ran my hand along the counter and found the dent. It's near the register, a little crater in the laminate. I made it my first week working the line at 22, when I dropped a full bus tub and a glass went through the surface. My father was furious. I cried in the walk-in for 10 minutes and then came out and finished my shift. The dent's been there 12 years. I've leaned on it 10,000 mornings. This place wasn't a thing I wanted to win. It was the thing I'd built my life inside while no one was looking. The next afternoon, Silas found me in the office. He had his coat on, but he didn't leave. He stood in the doorway, turning his hat in his hands. "The other two heard," he said. "About Marlowe. About the gutting." He meant the servers, the kitchen help. "I'll tell you what I told them. I've had better offers over the years. Real money." I stayed. He cleared his throat. "I stayed because of how you run this place. Not him. You." He put his hat on. "Whatever you're doing, we're with you. Marlowe shows up, we walk. All of us. Same day." I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. He started to go, then stopped. "My kid's surgery," he said. 3 years back. The one you asked about." He didn't look at me. "You covered my shifts that week and told me it was slow. It wasn't slow. I checked the schedule later. You worked doubles so I could sit in a hospital." He cleared his throat again, rougher. "I never said thank you for that. So, thank you." Then he left fast, before either of us had to do anything about our faces. I sat there a while. Then there was Dana, one of the servers, who knocked the next morning with 2 of the others behind her. She's 23, working her way through nursing school the way I worked my way through accounting. "We took a vote," she said, like it was a union, and maybe it was. "If they sell to the bistro people, none of us are staying for them. We wanted you to know it's not just Silas." She put a folded piece of paper on my desk, a list of names, the whole staff signed. "In case it helps, to show whoever you need to show that the place is the people, and the people are yours. I keep that list. It's in the folder with everything else, the one piece of evidence no court would ever need, and I'll never throw away." That night, I sat alone in the closed diner with one light on, the way I told you. The dent under my hand. And I called Cordelia. She remembered me before I finished my name. I told her everything. The dinner, the announcement, the text, the measured kitchen, the signed sale to Marlowe. The thread where Holden called me a bookkeeper, the outdated paperwork he'd passed off as title. She was quiet while I talked, the kind of quiet that's listening, not waiting. When I finished, she said, "Let me make sure I understand. Your father signed an agreement to sell substantially all the assets of a company in which he holds 40%. The operating agreement requires the managing member's written consent for exactly that. You're the managing member. You have not consented, and your brother represented to the buyer that the business was still a sole proprietorship, which it hasn't been since 2019. Right, then there is no sale," she said simply. "There's a piece of paper that exposes your father, and a brother who may have made misrepresentations to a buyer that are his own problem entirely. But there is no valid sale. They cannot give away what is legally yours to control." A pause. "Honestly, Amy, the cleaner question isn't whether you can stop it. You can stop it in your sleep. The question is what you want it to cost them, and what you want it to give you." "Amy," she said, gentler now. "What do you want? Because the law gives you several roads. You can block it quietly today with a letter. You can force a buyout of your father's share. You can let them find out the hard way, in front of whoever they choose to find out in front of." A pause. "What do you actually want here?" I thought about it. The dent in the counter, Walt and his eggs, Silas and his hat and his kid's surgery, Dana's list of names, my own name written over so many times the paper wore through. "I don't want revenge," I said. And I meant it. I want them to see me. Just once. To stand in a room and understand who I've been the whole time they were calling me no one. "Then we wait for the room," Cordelia said. "They're building you a stage. Let them finish it." I hung up. I looked around the empty diner one more time before I locked it. They were planning a ceremony to give away my life's work, and they had no idea, none, what I was holding. Let them build the stage. I'd decide when to walk onto it. 2 days later, my father made it official. He printed invitations. Actual invitations, on cardstock, like a wedding. Please join the Bobbitt family in celebrating a new chapter for Bobbitt's Diner. Saturday the 15th, 2 o'clock. He handed them out to regulars, mailed them to family, pinned one by the register. He invited vendors. He invited the linen guy. He invited a man from the local paper who sometimes wrote up small business features. A handover ceremony. To pass the diner to Holden in front of everyone who'd ever eaten there. I watched him pin the invitation by the register, beaming, and I said, "That's a lot of people, Dad." "Big moment deserves a big room," he said. "You'll help set up, won't you? You're good at that." "Of course," I said. Holden was worse. He started telling people the renovation would modernize the place. He told Walt, to his face, that the counter was coming out. Walt's been eating at that counter for 19 years. He looked at Holden like he'd announced he was paving over a grave. He printed business cards. I'm not exaggerating. Holden Bobbitt, owner, Bobbitt's Diner. He left a stack by the register next to the invitation. I picked one up, looked at it, and put it back in the stack, face down. Small things. I was collecting small things. He started giving the staff instructions too. Contradictory ones. The kind that come from someone who's never done the job. He told Silas to cut the portion sizes. That's where the margin is. Silas, who has run that kitchen for 20 years, looked at me over Holden's shoulder. I gave the smallest shake of my head. Silas changed nothing. Holden never checked. That's the thing about people who think they're owed a kingdom. They never audit it. They just assume the crown does the work. I heard Holden on the phone in his booth, low and pleased. "It's done," he said. "The 15th. After that it's all yours. Just need the last signature." He laughed at something Marlowe said. "No, she's not a problem. She does the books. She'll do what Dad says." She does the books. She'll do what Dad says. I went back to the office and sat down and let that be the last push I needed. I'd been giving them room to stop on their own, to ask one question, to wonder, even once, whether the girl who carried the trays might have grown into something they should check on before they sold her life. They never wondered. Not once in 2 months had either of them said the words, "Amy, what do you think about the business I'd saved, the business I ran, the business they were selling out from under me for cash to a man who guts neighborhoods?" So I made my decision. I would let them set the whole stage. The cardstock, the paper, the regulars, the man from the press, the business cards face up by the register. I would help set up the chairs, even. And then I would let them stand in the center of the room they built and reach for the thing that was mine. And I would let the law be the thing that stopped their hand, in front of every person whose respect they'd spent 30 years collecting. I told Cordelia the date. She said she'd be there. "Bring the folder," she said. "I'll bring the rest." There was just one more thing between me and the 15th. Sunday dinner. 2 weeks before the ceremony. The dinner I told you about at the very start. The one where my brother told me to apologize, and my father told me to know my place. I almost didn't go. I'm glad I did. Because I needed to know, really know, exactly who they were, with nothing held back, before I decided how much mercy to bring to that room. They showed me. They made their last mistake at the dinner table. Here is what happened that Sunday. All of it. I've gone over it so many times it plays like a film. Pot roast again. The good plates again. My mother quiet again. We were halfway through the meal when Holden decided he wasn't happy with how I'd been acting. I'd been short with him at the diner, he said. I hadn't been supportive of the transition. He'd asked me to reprint the new menus with his name on them as owner, and I'd said no, because of course he wasn't the owner. But I didn't say that part. I just said no. He put down his fork. "You've got an attitude problem," he said. "Ever since Dad's announcement." "I don't think I do," I said. "See, that tone." He looked at our father for backup, the way he's looked at him his whole life. "She thinks because she does the paperwork she runs things. She doesn't get that it's about family, about the name." "Holden," I said. "I'm not arguing with you." That made him angrier. "People like my brother need you to fight back so they can win. When you won't, they escalate." He crossed his arms. He raised his voice so the whole table had to hear it. "You know what? You're grounded until you apologize." He actually said it. 34 years old, telling me I was grounded, in our parents' dining room. "You don't get to come to the ceremony. You don't get to be part of this until you say sorry for the way you've been acting." I looked at him. I didn't laugh, though something in me wanted to. I looked at my father instead, waiting. I'll admit it. For one moment of Holden, that's enough. For 34 years of trays and registers and $80,000 and 6 years of signatures to buy me one sentence of defense. My father set down his coffee. He looked at me, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. And he said, "Know your place, Amy." The table went still. My mother stared at her plate so hard I thought it might crack. Holden smirked. He thought he'd won. I felt the cold come down over me, clean and total. And in that clarity I understood something I'd been circling for weeks. They would never see me. Not because they couldn't, because seeing me would cost them the story they liked better. I could set the truth in front of them 100 times, and they would step around it to protect the version where I was small. So I stopped waiting to be seen at this table. I'd be seen at the next one. I picked up my fork. I took a bite. I chewed. The room waited for me to break. I didn't. "Fine," I said. "That's all." One word. I finished my dinner in the silence. I said the roast was good because it was, and my mother had made it. I helped clear. And then I put on my coat and I drove home, and I slept better than I had in 2 weeks. The next morning was Monday, the 2nd of November. I got up before 5, the way I always do. But I didn't go to the diner. I drove to my parents' house instead. The sky was just going gray. I let myself in with the key I've had since I was 16. The house key, not the diner key. I'd separated them on the ring the night before, sitting at my kitchen table, and the small click of taking one off the other had felt like the most decisive thing I'd done in years. My father was at the kitchen table with his coffee, the paper open. He looked up, surprised. "Amy, you're not at the shop?" "No," I said. I set something on the table in front of him. The diner keys. All of them, on their own ring now, including the one to the back lock that only I can open. "I'm not going to the shop. I wanted to give these back." Then I put down an envelope beside the keys. My letter. Brief. Cordelia had helped me with the wording. 3 short paragraphs stating plainly that I was the managing member, that I had not consented to any sale, and that any attempt to transfer the business was void without my written approval. "And this is for you. You should read it before Saturday." Actually read it, Dad. For once in your life, read the thing before you decide it doesn't matter. He stared at the keys like they were a language he didn't speak. "What is this? Amy, what's gotten into you? You're being dramatic. Is this about Sunday? Your brother was just—" "It's not about Sunday," I said. And it wasn't. Sunday was just the night I stopped waiting. "Read the letter, Dad." The doorbell rang. My mother got it. I heard the door, and a low exchange, and then footsteps. And then Cordelia Hughes walked into my father's kitchen in a charcoal suit, calm as a closed door, carrying a leather folder. She'd insisted on coming. They should hear it once, formally, before the room, she'd said. Everyone deserves the chance to do the right thing quietly. If they take it, you never need the room at all. My father stood up so fast his chair scraped. "Who are you?" Cordelia didn't raise her voice. She never does. She looked at the keys on the table, and the unopened envelope, and the empty chair where I usually sat in this family, and at the man who'd told his daughter the night before to know her place. And she said the words that weeks later my mother told me she'll hear for the rest of her life. "Mr. Bobbitt, I'm Amy's attorney." A pause, even and cold. "Sir, what exactly have you done to your daughter?" He didn't have an answer. He looked at the envelope. He still didn't open it. Even then, a lawyer in his kitchen, his daughter's keys on his table, he couldn't make himself read the thing. That's when I knew Saturday would have to happen. He'd been handed the quiet way out, in his own kitchen, before coffee, and he let it sit there unopened like every other notice in the later drawer. The 15th came bright and cold. I helped set up. I want you to know that. I came in early and I arranged the chairs in rows, and I made the coffee, and I set out the pastries, because Saturday was a big day, and the regulars would be hungry. My father watched me work and decided my letter had been a tantrum, now past. "Glad you came around," he murmured, fixing his tie. He hadn't read it. I could tell. He never reads anything that looks like homework. By 2, the place was full. 50 people, maybe more. Walt in his usual spot. The nurses. The vendors. The linen guy. My aunts and uncles. Silas at the edge of the kitchen doorway with the whole staff behind him, aprons off, which my father didn't notice. The man from the paper had a little notebook. Cordelia stood quietly near the back by the door, in charcoal, a leather folder under her arm. My father didn't know who she was. My brother didn't either. My father tapped a glass with a fork. The room hushed. He loves a hushed room. He told the founding story one more time. 1988. From nothing. A man's name on a door. People smiled. They'd heard it. They liked it. Then he put his hand on Holden's shoulder. "So today," he said, "I'm proud to hand Bobbitt's diner over to my son. Holden, it's yours." Applause. Holden beamed. He actually took a little bow. I stepped forward. Not fast. Just enough to be seen. "Before everyone celebrates," I said, "I think the room deserves the whole story. Don't you, Dad?" My father's smile tightened. "Amy, not now." "Now's perfect," I said, and I nodded to Cordelia. She walked to the front. She didn't hurry. She set the leather folder on the counter, right beside the dent, and opened it. "My name is Cordelia Hughes," she said, pleasant as a librarian. "I'm an attorney. I represent the managing member of Bobbitt's Diner, LLC. She let that word sit. LLC. A few regulars exchanged looks. "I'm here to make sure that whatever's announced today is, in fact, legal. So let's review." "That's a formality," my father said quickly to the room, waving a hand. "Lawyers. Always a formality. The shop's mine. I built it. I can give it to whoever You hold 40%, Cordelia said. The room went quiet in a new way. The kind of quiet where people stopped chewing. She laid the first page on the counter where people could see. "This is the operating agreement for Bobbitt's Diner, LLC, filed with the state of Ohio in 2019. It establishes 2 members. Reginald Bobbitt, 40%. She laid down the next page. Amy Bobbitt, 60%, and managing member. Another page. And this clause, which Mr. Bobbitt signed, requires the managing member's written consent for any sale of the company's assets. Walt, at the counter, leaned over to read it. He's a retired machinist. He reads things carefully. He looked up at my father, and then at me, and something rearranged itself in his face. My father's face had gone the gray I remembered from the day of the red-stamped letter. Amy fixed some paperwork years ago. That's all that was. This is the paperwork. Cordelia said. You signed it. On the hood of your car, I'm told, in the rain, without reading it. Her voice never rose. You signed away the authority you're trying to use right now. That's not an accusation. It's just what the document says. A murmur moved through the room. One of my aunts said, not quietly enough, Reginald, you didn't read it? Holden stepped in, because Holden cannot stand to be off camera. This is ridiculous. She does the books. She doesn't own anything. Dad owns it. Dad's giving it to me. Does he? Cordelia turned a page toward him. Then perhaps you can explain this. And she laid down the purchase and sale agreement. Marlowe Hospitality. Reginald Bobbitt's signature on the seller line. The lowball cash number. And Holden, listed as representative. The man from the paper started writing faster. I watched him underline something twice. This is an executed agreement, Cordelia said. To sell this diner to a buyer who intends to gut it. Signed by a man who owns 40%. Brokered by a man who owns nothing. She laid down one more page, Holden's message thread. Represented to the buyer in writing as a sole proprietorship that hasn't legally existed since 2019. Sold without the consent of the woman who owns the controlling interest, runs the business, and saved it from closure with $80,000 of her own money. She looked up, mild as ever. It isn't a transfer. It's an attempted sale of property that wasn't theirs to sell, to a buyer who was shown the wrong paperwork. Silence. Real silence. The cooler hummed. The sign buzzed out front. Somebody's coffee cup clinked against a saucer and it sounded enormous. Walt was the first to speak, to no one in particular. She opened this place every morning, he said slowly, for as long as I've been coming. 5 a.m. I've seen her car. He looked at my father. I always figured it was hers. And then, because the antagonist always hangs himself, Holden lost control. You can't do this! He wasn't talking to the room anymore. He was talking to me, and his voice cracked up high and ugly. That's my money. Marlowe's paying cash. I already spent. I have plans. You can't just... You do the books. You don't get to... He caught himself a half-second too late, but everyone had heard it. That's my money, not the family's legacy, not Dad's dream. His money. The cash from gutting the place where Walt had eaten breakfast for 19 years, the place Silas had stayed at through better offers, the place I'd opened at 5 every morning of my adult life. A woman near the front, one of the night nurses, made a small, disgusted sound and set down her fork. You could feel the room turn. It turns all at once. A room. 1 second they're your father's audience. The next they're witnesses. In the back, a man none of us had been watching stood up. Trim, expensive coat. Garrett Marlowe. He'd come to see his purchase celebrated. He looked at the operating agreement on the counter, and the 40%, and the daughter who held the rest, and the thread where he'd been shown paperwork 6 years out of date, and he understood in about 4 seconds that he'd signed a deal with people who couldn't deliver, and might have lied to him doing it. I think there's been a serious misrepresentation, Marlowe said, to no one and everyone. He buttoned his coat. He looked at Holden with an expression I can only describe as the look you give a check that bounced. My attorneys will be in touch, about the deposit, and about the rest. And he walked out. The bell over the door rang behind him. It's the bell I installed. That sound, the bell, the door, the buyer leaving, was the sound of the whole plan dying. My father reached out toward the closing door, a small, useless gesture, like a man watching something blow off a truck on the highway. If you've ever had to stop asking permission to be respected by your own family, if you've ever had to put the truth on the counter and let it speak for you, I'd genuinely love to hear what that moment was for you. Tell me below, because then my mother did the bravest thing I've ever seen her do. She walked to the front, past my father, and she set down a shoebox. She opened it. Inside were 6 years of receipts. Every transfer I'd made, every payment, every deposit, kept in secret by a woman too frightened to speak but too honest to throw them away. "She's been carrying it the whole time," my mother said to the room, in a voice I'd never heard her use. "All of it. I should have said so years ago." She looked at my father. "I'm sorry, Amy. Not him. I'm sorry." She'd kept those receipts in a shoebox in the back of her closet for 6 years. Every transfer slip, every deposit, sorted by year with the rubber bands she reuses. I think she'd known, the whole time, that a day like this might come, and that when it did, the truth would need a witness who couldn't be talked out of it. She'd been too afraid to speak, but she'd never been too afraid to save the proof. In our family, that turned out to be the bravest thing anyone did. People ask me, now, if I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt quiet. The room emptied slowly that afternoon. The regulars came up to me, one by one. Walt held my hand in both of his and said, "I always wondered who really opened this place." Silas put his hat on and grinned at me from the doorway and said, "Boss?" and went to start the grill, because it was almost dinner and people would be hungry. The sale died. Marlowe's lawyers tried to claw back the deposit from my father and brother. That's their problem to sort out. And the last I heard, it isn't going well for them. The diner is mine to run, legally and plainly, the way it has been in every way that mattered for 6 years. I had new menus printed. They say Bobbitt's on the front, because that's the name, and the name was never the lie. The lie was about whose work it stood for. I don't speak to my brother. He's called. I don't pick up. I'm told he tells people I stole the family business, which is a remarkable thing to say about a business you tried to sell behind my back. My father and I are something else. Smaller, careful. He came in one morning at, for once, 5 o'clock, and stood in the doorway while I made the coffee, and didn't tell the founding story. "I didn't read it," he said finally. "Any of it. I should have read it." It's the closest he gets. I let him pour the coffee. That's the boundary, and it's enough. He can be here, in the room, if he comes at 5 and pours his own. He doesn't get to be the man who gives the place away. He never was. He just got to believe he was, and I've stopped paying for his belief. That's the part I'd want you to hear, if you've ever been the invisible one. Setting a boundary isn't a speech. It's not a screaming match. Mine was one word at a dinner table. Fine. And a set of keys on a table, and a folder I'd kept all along. The quietest people are not the weakest people. Sometimes we're just the ones still doing the math while everyone else is talking. My mother comes most afternoons. She doesn't fold rags, nobody asked her to fold anymore. She sits at the counter near the dent, and we talk. Really talk, the way we never could in that house with him listening. The shoebox sits in my office now, on the shelf, where I can see it. 6 years of receipts she kept in secret because she couldn't say the words. She's saying them now. It took her 60 years to find her voice, and she's spending it on me. And I've decided that's worth more than the decades she didn't. Some nights I close up alone and sit in the empty dining room with one light on, the way I did the night this all started. The cooler hums, the sign buzzes, the booths remember the day, and I put my hand on the dent in the counter. 12 years old now, the little crater from my first week. And I think about the girl who cried in the walk-in and came out and finished her shift. I'd tell her this, if I could. You don't have to break the table to leave it. You just have to know which one is yours. My name is Amy. The shop had my father's name, but the signature that counted, the one that opened the door at 5 in the morning, the one the law came looking for, the one my whole family stepped around for 30 years, was always, quietly, mine.